The first episode of The Last of Us TV show is probably one of the strongest opening episodes for a new show that I've ever seen. Not only does it manage to faithfully adapt the source material, a video game, it's also intriguing and suspenseful in its own right. Nevertheless, he says, because of course he does, I do think it suffers slightly from NPC syndrome. Do you get to the Cloud District often? Non-playable character syndrome is an unoriginal term that I made up. It's a term borrowed from the realm of video games, but in fact has nothing to do with them. Basically, when a movie or any narrative fiction presents non-critical characters as foolish or incompetent for reasons of narrative convenience, it has NPC syndrome, perhaps to its detriment, perhaps not. Two terrorists talk about the emergency escape hatch that they already know about beneath an occasionally sneezing ventilation duct. NPC syndrome. The murderer leaves nothing at the crime scene other than a matchbook from a club where he is well known. NPC syndrome. Stormtroopers are a good example of this. Could they really control the galaxy when they can't hit a barn door? No. Does it matter? No. Star Wars doesn't present itself as a super serious, hard sci-fi military reenactment. In other places, NPC syndrome is more detrimental. A prime offender might be The Walking Dead. There, characters who've survived years in the post-apocalyptic wastes act like idiots, throw caution to the wind, and conveniently get bit, often by a zombie that seemingly materializes out of nowhere and decides to remain absolutely silent until it's in frame. This sort of thing, nonsense logic, lazy writing, doesn't usually matter in shows that don't present themselves entirely seriously. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief when things like that happen in, say, Z Nation, because Z Nation is not trying to be a serious drama with real-world logic. It's about zombies that get crushed by giant wheels of cheese, which is what I want from it. But something like The Walking Dead has as much humour in it as an Egyptian mummy has precious bodily fluids. When a character is killed off or is saved through convenience, often the convenience of a poor adversary, it's far harder to get away with without damaging the tone of things. After seasons of this, I don't feel like the characters of The Walking Dead have survived because of the things they've done, or even through luck, but simply because they are the main characters. The first episode of The Last of Us suffers from this too, a bit, although I'd say far less so. The Last of Us video game was written and co-directed by Neil Druckmann, and he created and co-wrote the TV show with Craig Mazin. So perhaps as you'd expect, it recreates the somber tone that was such an important part of the game without much problem. But it also brings along some of the NPC syndrome symptoms that were easier to gloss over in the game because of its medium. For example, a single soldier to overcome in most games is nothing unusual. It's part of learning the mechanics of the game. But in the TV show, which is entirely serious, it is set in a world that follows our rules, it's jarring. This soldier would almost certainly not be alone. It certainly is convenient that he is alone. I think it's very unlikely he'd radio anything in. Surely by now orders would be to sweep anything that moves, and not that it matters, but he wouldn't say sir, and he would never ever say repeat in this situation. But then later, 20 years later in fact, we have the same situation, a single soldier, unwatched by others, This time, urinating so close to the wall, you have to wonder why he even bothered unzipping at all. Why would he be alone? Why wouldn't there be people on the wall? Really, it's to let our heroes slip away. Now really, these are nitpicks. I think these scenes are actually done very well, but some of this sort of logic is a bit distracting, primarily because The Last of Us is so earnest. A police or military state would understand that a worn, old uniform is not the same as a dirty uniform. You better clean that uniform or I will run you so far up that flagpole the rest of this sentence won't make any sense! More important than that though, and again a bit easier to shrug away in the 2013 game, the logic of the two organizations critical to the show's story. The baton-swinging Fedra and the rebel leader costume-worn-led Fireflies. It doesn't really matter, I can totally get over it, but I'm having a moan, so it's the incompetence and lack of coherent strategy or real goals of these two organizations that drives the story forward. Far more nitpicky, there was a massive catastrophe where the world fell apart, although not into total anarchy. Some bastions of safety survived. The army fought on. So the United States changed its name to Fedra, the Federal Disaster Response Agency. Fedra? Who runs them? Lieutenant Government? But the Fireflies who oppose them are presented here in an even more generic way. They want freedom and democracy for Boston, which might be relatable and make sense if there weren't a zombie apocalypse outside. I'm not really sure what yet that Fedra has... You know what, I'm saying it right now. Fedra has done nothing wrong. Hashtag Fedra's done nothing wrong. Hashtag mistrial. Also, I question the logic of a small-time criminal begging the person in their captivity not to get her boyfriend on him after he releases her, then trying to sell a dud battery to a terrorist group and getting into a firefight with them over it. Perhaps more jarring, Joel and Tess arrive at the Fireflies' spray-painted hideout to find they've just missed a firefight, which the Fireflies say Fedra must have heard, but Tess and Joel didn't hear it. The Fireflies have been around for years, but they have people walk up to strangers and say things that very much make it look like they work for the Fireflies. This guy here might as well have gone up to Joel and said, "The winter burns in Moscow. Wink wink, I'm wearing a trench coat." Also, really, Tommy, you can't just climb over this car dead quick. Just slide the gun over and then crawl over it. But also, thanks for spawning in. And that's pretty negative. Yes, it's TV logic. It's easy to pick apart. I think the biggest logical flaw of it is really the flaw of the genre. I think the army would contain a zombie outbreak. I think they would reclaim the highways and have them open, at least for themselves, within weeks. I think they'd fill the metros with concrete before they just gave up on them. You got to suspend your disbelief a bit. If we keep on going down that road, we're just going to get to the point, well, why should I get out of bed in the morning? I mean, we're all going to die. These things don't really matter here, because although The Last of Us does want us to take it seriously, and does try to represent a realistic world depiction, it's really more about Joel and Ellie, two survivors and their relationship. That's what's important, and that's really believable. To me, the pure logic of the story is flawed, but nowhere near as flawed as in other series. Cough, The Walking Dead. I do think what they're trying to do here is an interesting challenge in making an extremely faithful adaptation of a video game with benefits and pitfalls. I may revisit this along those lines in a bit, although I may not, I may just forget. I really was impressed with the first episode. I thought the acting and the casting choices were great. I especially thought that the sense of scale in the action scenes especially were handled very well. Good job. So, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye. You can support me on Patreon if you've got some money you don't want. Twitter if you've got some time that you don't want, which I'm guessing you do, because you're watching this. Facebook, I guess. Dig. Find me on Bebo. Find me on BlackBerry Messenger. Trinkets, odds and ends. Frame pictures of Frasier. How many dragon bones for this? Do come back.